Okay, so to continue a little bit with Milgram here, what happens when a victim gets closer? And so Milgram did some follow-up studies here and um, changed a couple of the situations. So he varied how close the learner or the actor, the confederate was to the participant, and basically asked, like, okay, if obedience is associated with who the person is, it's dispositional in nature. Should moving the learner matter much? Okay. So, what he found was that when the learner was moved further away, obedience was higher in proximity. Obedience was higher. When the learner was in the same room, obedience decreased. So, the participant had to physically place the learner's hand on the shock plate. The obedience decreased even more. And so, literally, when the participant had to make physical contact with the other person, they were less likely to shock them. So the harder the victim was to distance from them, the harder it became to obey. It made the suffering more salient. It was harder to psychologically distance oneself. The victim's the victim more was the victim's suffering was much more immediate, it was harder to ignore, and they might have felt more responsible. So the distance can make the consequences of our actions easier to psychologically separate from the action itself. And so I did put a picture here of drone warfare. Does the fact that we fight war now, basically sometimes behind computer screens, make it easier to do horrific things than if we were, say, doing hand-to-hand combat? And I'm just asking a question. Or in a bureaucratic arena, when decisions are made from the very top that affect the people at the very bottom, when you have an Amazon CEO make decisions that affect people the very bottom of the pyramid that are possibly going to result in suffering or consequences experienced by somebody we never see. Also, Milgram did change the other person in the room, so the authority figure. And so, and obedience was stronger when the authority appeared to be legitimate, close, and responsible. And so, legitimate, connected to a respected institution, close, physically present, and responsible. They appeared to accept responsibility for what happened and that they were in charge, so to speak. And so, some examples are like CEOs, the president, judges, also like charismatic leaders that make themselves out to be these things, even if they are not legitimate or responsible. Um, we might think of like Jim Jones or Hitler or Stalin or Mao Zedong. And so authority isn't simply somebody saying like to do it. The context or the situation is going to provide us information as to how powerful this authority figure is. And as an authority, Milgram found as the authority figure became less immediate or less legitimate as a result of the information from the situation, obedience actually decreased. And so Milgram asked, yeah, would this feel different in somebody's basement? Absolutely. So he moved the study from Yale, and again, it he actually put them in a room and with the experimenters in a room, gave instructions remotely, and the obedience went down. And so just even removing oneself decreased obedience. It was much harder to defy the face-to-face authority. And in regard to responsibility, a participant might think the researcher designed the study. They say continue, they know the risks, he's responsible, not me. So here's the thing, authority becomes more powerful when it seems legitimate, present and responsible for the outcome. So he also did one more variation in that, okay, he added a couple of additional people. The participant worked alongside two other quote unquote teachers, even though they were Confederates. One refused to participate, then another refused. So, what do you think happened? And during two lectures ago, we talked about how with a unanimous group, conformity increases, but if there's one dissenter, conformity decreases. So now the authority figure still says to continue, but the peers show that refusal is possible and you're not alone. And so, why might watching someone else refuse to make it easier for you? Again, we talked about validating concern, breaking social norms, reducing isolation, showing that authority can be challenged. And yes, I do have a picture of Rosa Parks here because she was basically the spur for the Montgomery bus boycott by refusing to give up her seat. And because she did, others felt courageous enough to do so as well. Anyways, Milgram's study, he did show that there was a dramatic drop um in obedience. 65%. I'm sorry. In the baseline condition, 65, two out of every three reached 450 volts. When two people refused, only 10% continued to 450 volts. That was a significant decrease. Same participant population, same machine, same authority, same learner. The difference was the social situation. By adding those people who refused, and that changed whether somebody or not obeyed. And so this also goes to show that it's not necessarily the personality of the person that determines whether they obey or not, because if that was the case, they still would have obeyed. That significant decrease wouldn't have happened. So the social situation changed. Seeing somebody else resist made it much easier. And again, if everybody else silently complies, everybody else assumes, everybody else thinks it's okay. But once one person says, I'm not comfortable with this, it can change the entire dynamic. Courage can be contagious, socially contagious. Resistance becomes easier when it's socially supported. So, what predicts obedience? It's not simply who you are. It can be how close is the victim? How close is authority? Does the authority seem legitimate? Who seems to be responsible for everything that's happening here? What are the people around me doing? How gradually did commitment develop? So, Milgram's finding, the most important one might not be just that two out of three people obeyed and went all the way to 450 volts. It's that obedience changed when the situation changed. So if situations can make obedience more likely, the question becomes, what helps people resist inappropriate authority? And so Milgram's research does point to the power of the situation. Again, we talked about the legitimate authority. They have the right to tell me what to do. In Milgram's case, they're from Yale, they're an experimenter, they're a scientist. That gradual commitment, okay, it's only 15 volts at a time. I'm not sure where the stopping point should be, and I've already gone this far. The shifted responsibility. So the experimenter says to continue, so the participant feels the researcher designed it, knows the risk, and they're responsible for this. They're uncertain. I'm not sure about what's happening here. I'm not the expert. Informational influence might say they may know better. Social support, others are complying. And these factors stack, they're cumulative. And these powerful situations are often powerful because several pressures operate at one time. And so I did include this picture and I didn't include the one I usually include because it's just a little too graphic, but this is a picture from the remnants of Jonestown. After hundreds of people literally drank the Kool-Aid, after Jim Jones The cult leader of the People's Temple told them to. And they did it. They squirted the cyanide-laced Kool-Aid into their children's mouths. They stayed in line as they saw other people writhing on the ground after drinking the Kool-Aid, dying. And people might ask, why did they continue to do this? Yes, yes, there were guns involved. Some people had guns pointed at them, things like that, but Jim Jones said to do it. And part of the reason they did it, they viewed him as a legitimate authority. The gradual commitment, oh my God, I've been part of this cult for how long? I've been with them since California. I've gone this far. And I'm not the one responsible. Again, Jim knows exactly what's happening. He created this. He's in charge. He knows what's going on. And again, uncertainty. He knows something that I don't. And others are doing this to everybody that I care about and trust is also doing this. I'm sure those are some of the factors involved here. And so, on the other hand, what makes resistance more likely? We need to recognize that gradual escalation. So we notice when just one more step keeps moving the boundary. Like, okay, it's one more step and one more step and one more step. And you notice, like, oh my God, like it's the boundary keeps shifting on me. Maintaining personal responsibility. I am still responsible for what I choose to do. Just because a researcher is conducting this research or Jim Jones is in charge of this, I am responsible for what I do and my behavior. I was told to doesn't erase agency. Eichmann literally said I was following orders. Yes, yes, he was. That does not erase the choices that he made during the Holocaust. Legitimacy. Does this person actually have the right or expertise to demand this? Are they actually qualified? Does this violate any sort of law or ethics? Find or become a dissenter. When we are not alone, we are more powerful. One other person can change the entire social environment. And before the pressure begins, know what your boundaries are. Do not comply in advance. Dissent in advance. It's easier to resist before a series of small compromises becomes normal. Before you accept something as normal dissent. But I will always make the disclaimer because it's important. Obedience is not inherently bad because we depend on people responding to legitimate authority in order to have a society. We need to have laws, safety procedures, emergency instructions, professional standards, rules that coordinate behavior. When there is a tornado, we do need to follow the route that we learned during tornado drills. Okay, we need to do that. Okay, we need people to not drive drunk. We need people to obey laws. So again, the danger is not obedience itself. It's when there is uncritical obedience. Now, we know why we shouldn't be driving drunk because we can hurt other people. So we think about that critically. It makes sense. So we do obey it. We know why we need to obey and follow through with the tornado drill path. Sorry, I'm at a loss for words. It's because it's going to save lives and help people. So you can think critically and recognize, like, yes, this makes sense. We need to critically think through, okay, is this something that should require obedience? We do want people to obey stop signs, fire alarms. The problem starts when authority conflicts with ethics and safety. And the social influence itself is neither good nor bad. It depends on what's the behavior, who's the authority, what is the group, what are the consequences, and can we think critically? And so the goal is not automatic obedience or automatic defiance, it's thinking it through critically and thoughtfully judging a situation. History gives us plenty of examples. I've given a couple of these. I'm going to make this very brief. I'm hoping that I just inspire you to do some research on your own. So, yep, resistance is absolutely possible. So during the Holocaust, yes, lots of people complied and accommodated the Nazis. Others resisted. Lots of people were killed. The Danish resistance is an example of this. So during the Nazi occupation, yes, there was a major threat of the deportation of Danish Jews. As a result, the Danish resistance was created. It was a network of, it was a resistance network that helped thousands of Danish Jews escape to Sweden via fishing boats. It was an entire, basically casually organized resistance group that required coordination and social support. And again, the question is what made resistance possible when obedience was dangerous to challenge? People weren't acting alone. There were networks, other people were resisting too. Then that becomes the norm. Resistance can become socially supported. You can reject the moral legitimacy of harmful orders or those that are in power. So a lot of the same social processes that we talked about in supporting obedience can also be redirected toward resistance. And just so we're clear here, Milgram and everything we talked about does not fully explain the Danish resistance, but it's tangentially related. It's an application. So this is where we bring this all back together. Now, okay, one person's behavior changes the social situation faced by the next person. That is what is important. And so, in a much less high stakes situation, I'm just going to read this through. You can pause it if you want to think about it. Then we will finish up. So, you recently started a new job. Your supervisor asked you to change information in a report so the department's results look a little better. And at first it seems minor, but over time the requests start to get larger. And you notice everybody else seems to go along with it, and your supervisor says this is how it's always done. Your coworker tells you don't worry about it. The boss is responsible. You're really uncomfortable, but nobody else objects. So think about, after everything we went through, what social pressures are operating here. Feel free to think about that, roll it over in your head. And in conclusion, yes, we went over conformity and obedience along with a little bit of resistance. But with conformity, yes, we follow the group. Informational conformity, influence, they may know better. And so we take on their perspective and conform, or normative, I know better, but like I want to belong. With obedience, we follow authority, especially when it is legitimate. There's gradual commitment, they're responsible, and there's situational pressure, but there's also resistance, and social influence can work in that other direction if we have an ally, a dissenter. We take personal responsibility and we think quickly because the situation influences us, but it does not eliminate choice. And yes, I put this picture on here for a reason because truly we don't know our true power. If only we knew how these phenomena truly psychologically work within us and within groups, we could harness so much power in society and create so much change. And that's exactly where I'm going to leave you today.